A very good evening to all of you. At the very outset, I'd like to thank GE for having me as one of their speakers for their Voice of Imaging webinar series. So when GE came up with the thought of speaking on evolution of digital mammography, I was truly wondering as to what should I be speaking for an hour about evolution of digital mammography. So I took the liberty of calling it evolution of mammography over the past 100 odd years. So today in this talk, let's get a bird's eye view of the journey of breast imaging over the past 100 odd years to where it stands today as a beautiful lady, clear as a crystal in front of us. So let's travel back in time and see where it all began. So we all owe our lives, our profession, and the science owes a lot to this great man called William Conrad Röntgen, who was born in Germany, who was a German physicist, and on the 8th of November discovered a new electromagnetic radiation and didn't know what to call it, and hence call it the X-rays. Later, we call them the Röntgen rays after his name. And this was the first radiograph that was taken by him after 6 weeks of discovering this X-rays of the hand of his wife, and you can actually see her wedding ring. So this is probably the first image that was ever taken of a human body part. So 18 years later, this amazingly creative surgeon, a German surgeon called Dr. Albert Salomon of Berlin, began a study of 3,000 mastectomies and wondered if by using these newly discovered X-rays, he could correlate known cancer tissue of breast specimens to the radiographs taken of the same breast. He used radiography of mastectomy specimens to demonstrate the spread of the tumor to the axillary nodes and discovered microcalcification on the images of specimens with known breast pathology. Salomon also showed that highly infiltrating carcinomas could be radiologically distinguished from circumscribed carcinoma. And in 1913, he actually wrote Röntgen photographs. He actually called them photographs of the excised breast specimens, could demonstrate the form and spread of cancerous tumors. So he was the first one who actually saw a breast cancer in the breast. And these are the radiographs of these specimens, and one can clearly see these cancers within the mastectomized breast. Later, in 1930, so you see that for almost 20 years, nothing really happened in breast imaging. And Dr. Stafford Warren from the Rochester Memorial Hospital in New York published his successful application of preoperative breast radiographs to help predict malignant from benign disease in 119 patients with a histologic diagnosis. And if you can see this, you can actually see the chest wall and the ribs, a part of the lung, and then the breast. So you actually know he used the regular X-rays, the industrial film, to get the image of the breast, just as you would image any other part of the body. And Warren obtained breast röntgenograms by using the same fluoroscopy equipment that was used to image the other body parts. And interpretation seemed more challenging because he was using the stereoscopic viewing technique, which is extremely cumbersome for those of you who have read about stereoscopic viewing. But he noted that radiographic interpretation often predicted malignancy better than clinical evaluation. And in series of 119 patients, there were only 8 misclassifications with an amazing accuracy of 93%. So we owe it all to this great man, Stafford Warren of Rochester Memorial Hospital. So later on, several radiologists, surgeons tried doing imaging of the breast. One of them was Lockwood, who reported the value of breast radiography with cases showing radiopathologic correlation. So you can actually see another similar fluoroscopic image of the breast with the cancer there, and this is the correlative histologic image. And some people tried to inject some contrast into the breast. At that point in time, what was available was throrastrot, which we all know emits radiation and not very safe. So these are the images maybe taken in the 1930s, showing actually the modern day ductogram. And somebody tried a very novel technique of injecting carbon dioxide into the breast, that is, inject air into the breast, and then see that the tumor is adherent to the adjacent tissue and wouldn't get displaced, and then realize that this was the cancer inside the breast. Then in 1948, almost 15 to 18 years after Dr. Warren's work, Dr. Gershon Cohen was able to demonstrate the feasibility of mammography to depict occult breast cancer. Later on in 1949, several articles were starting to come out from Uruguay by Dr. Raul Lebon, who reported finding radiologically visible microcalcifications in 30% of breast cancers, and expanding on his findings in his articles in 1951 and a book written in English, which revitalized the interest in breast imaging all over again. And he was the first one who recognized the importance of breast compression in improving the image quality of the breast. So this was the kind of machine that he worked on, and you can actually see the woman standing there and a cone kind of a cone coning down onto the breast, and this was the CC view, and this was the true lateral view. And Lebon used non-screen films. Obviously, screens weren't discovered, weren't invented by them, and the target film distance was 60 centimeters, just like the the radiographs. And then he used a low energy 30 kVp. So this is the first time we see somebody started thinking of low energy X-ray beam, and used 5 MAS for each centimeter thickness of the compressed breast. And he was the first to report significant association of radiographically detectable microcalcification, which may be seen in extensive as well as incipient lesions and breast carcinoma. So he was one of the first ones to understand that it's not just cancers, but non-cancer tissue and non-cancer tumors can also have calcification in them. Leboni also described the radiographic differences between the benign and the malignant calcifications. So all the women who complain about the modern day breast compression need to know that this was because of Lebon that we have the compression of the modern day. So one of the most important persons in spreading the knowledge of mammography and imaging of the breast is Dr. Robert L. Egan. He described a standardized direct exposure mammographic technique, and he released a report on 1,000 cases of breast cancer at MD Anderson, in which mammography was found to be useful for depicting unsuspected cancers and for decreasing the number of mastectomies for benign disease. Egan's mammography was performed with a ceiling-mounted general-purpose X-ray tube powered by special generator capable of lower kV exposures. Again, he was also one of the pioneers of starting to use the low kV energy beam to image the breast. And this was the kind of machine that Egan used for all the 1,000 women that he imaged. And he was the first one who described positioning techniques to get the nipple in profile and avoid folds or overlapping structures. He used a direct exposure film, and it had no compression because compression devices weren't discovered by then. And as there were no screens, the images were low in contrast. And because there were no screens, the exposure times were relatively longer, taking as much as 5 to 6 seconds per image. But he was the first one to have developed a standardized technique that was reproducible and transferable to other practices, and was also instrumental in training a critical mass of radiologists who were able to reproduce his results. So it was Dr. Egan's work and teaching that spread across America and Europe and taught people to do breast imaging and get the right views and use the right technique. In fact, some people call him the father of the modern day mammography. So now, as the technique evolved, people started realizing the importance of screening mammograms when they saw that cancers could be picked up much before they could be felt by the palm in clinical examination. So from 63 to 66, Philip Starks, Louis Bennett, and Sam Shapiro, under the Health Insurance Plan of New York, organized the first ever randomized controlled trial of periodic screening with physical examination and mammography to determine whether it could reduce breast cancer mortality. So the 5-year follow-up results showed that compared with control group, the mortality was reduced by almost 1/3 for the women who underwent breast cancer screening. The decrease in mortality remained at a significant level through the 18-year follow-up period. And the health insurance plan trial provided the foundation and scientific basis for subsequent worldwide success of screening mammography programs. So in the late 1960s, Starks became the first person ever to develop a successfully operate a self-contained mobile unit for cancer screening with mammography. So this was probably one of the first ever mobile screening units, and they could image almost 70 women per day. And this is the article where he writes about the value of mammography in reduction of mortality from breast cancer, which was written way back in 1973. And the encouraging results of the health insurance program study prompted the National Cancer Institute and the Cancer Society of America to launch their large multi-institutional breast cancer detection screening study. The HIP study showed a benefit for screening mammography using 1960s technique, which was there was no screen and there was no substantial breast compression. But the breast cancer detection demonstration program started using improved mammography techniques of the 70s when the film screen mammography started to come in, and it showed even greater benefit of screening mammography with similar survival demonstrated in women aged between 40 to 70 years of age. Multiple subsequent randomized controlled trials have since shown significant breast cancer mortality reduction from screening mammography. And one of the most notable studies done by Dr. Laszlo Tabar in Sweden was the data from the 2-county Swedish trial, which supported the contention that breast cancer is localized to the breast for a variable period of time before the development of systemic disease. This was probably one of the longest randomized controlled trials, and the results of which were coming in even as late as 2011. And the conclusions of the study, of the first leg of the study, told us that the time to diagnosis is critical, and the earlier, the better. Cancers less than 1 centimeter have a 12-year survival rate of 95%, and node-negative breast cancers less than 1.5 centimeters have a 12-year survival rate of 94%. And randomized controlled trials starting at the age of 40 years have shown 20 to 40% reduction in breast cancer mortality in screened groups compared to the controls. It is accepted that breast cancers grow more rapidly in premenopausal women, so screening mammography every 2 years is recommended starting at the age of 40 years. Accuracy of mammography is about 85% and is by far the best screening modality available. So these were the conclusions made by the 2-county Swedish trial in its first phase. But we all know that subsequent studies and subsequent population-based controlled trials have shown that an annual mammography is now the norm of the day, and you want to screen women over the age of 40 every year for breast cancer. So this was one of the first mammography machines released by the Scenograph company way back in the 60s in Europe. So later on, simultaneously, a new procedure, a new technique evolved, which was the zero radiography, which was being used to actually, the same technique is used to Xerox or photostat the paper prints. So they tried to use this technique to image the breast. And we owe it to Dr. John Wolf, who worked closely with the Xerox Corporation to improve the xerographic process for imaging the breast. Because it had a wide latitude and there was very good edge enhancement, which was inherent to the technology, they felt that it was well suited for imaging the breast. But the disadvantage was the jamming of the papers, the non-uniform toner distribution, the lack of continuing innovation in that field, and relatively high dose of radiation. Probably this was one of the highest, the strongest deterrent the fall of zero radiography as a modality to image the breast. So now these are just some images of zero radiography. Those of you who have been into breast imaging from the 80s and the 70s maybe had an opportunity to actually see some of them. And here you can actually see a tiny little spiculated lesion with the kind of linear calcifications. And on the other image, you can actually see a spiculated mass. So when everybody thought that this was it and they were able to do good quality mammography, but of course with a bit of more radiation and not perfect positioning, there was more to come. So until the 70s, acceptable diagnostic quality in mammograms required hand processing or use of slow mechanical processors and extremely stringent developing and fixing techniques, because mammogram was extremely sensitive to temperature and the concentration of the solutions. And to reduce radiation and exposure times, J.L. Price and P.D. Butler in 1970 experimented with high-definition intensifying screen and the industrial film held in intimate contact with an air-evacuated polyethylene envelope. And in 1973, DuPont came out with the first ever film screen mammography system, which would hold the screen and the film very tightly together. And Eastman Kodak was soon to follow, and they also introduced the vacuum cassette of the mammography, the modern day film screen mammography. So the development of film screen mammography and uniform thickness compression was a major advantage. So simultaneously, as the developments happened in the screen technology and the film technology, people started thinking of compression plates, of making compression plates, which would give us uniform exposure of the breast tissue. So screen film techniques used a more collimated X-ray beam to make the exposure, allowed faster imaging times, reduced dose, and somewhat increased image contrast. Around this time, compression devices were developed with capability for uniform thickness compression of the breast. Applying uniform thickness compression also spread out the breast more effectively, permitting better visualization. The combination of shorter exposure times and stabilization of the breast afforded by compression yielded less image degradation due to motion blur. So development of film screen mammography and uniform thickness compression was a great advantage. And screen film mammography eventually completely replaced direct exposure film mammography and zero mammography. And all of you who have started breast imaging in the early 90s, I'm sure our learning curve starts from the film screen mammography to the present day digital mammography. So this is what is a simple diagram to show what happens in film screen mammography. You have the X-ray tube, you have the spectrum, you have the compressed breast, you have the film, you have the screen, and you have the image, which is the image receptor, and this is the latitude of the film screen system. Now, until the late 70s and the 80s, they used only a single view, which used to be the true lateral view of the breast. In 1974, the oblique mammography views was introduced as an efficient single view method of screening. The oblique view allowed more breast tissue to be included in the image field, particularly the posterior tissues along the axillary tail of the breast. And the oblique view also seemed to show was seen to be superior to the medial lateral view for breast cancer detection. Although the oblique view showed more breast tissue than the lateral view, two views were ultimately found to be better than a single view. And then when they started doing the CC and the MLO view, they realized they were able to detect almost 15 to 20% more breast cancers. So somewhere in the mid-80s is when we started actually doing two-view film screen mammography. So two-view screening resulted in more cancers being found and resulted in fewer callbacks, and hence the advantage of obtaining the second view far outweighed the risk of radiation and added cost. So the person who told us that we need to do two views and taught us the MAG views and taught us the triangulation was none other than Dr. Sickles. And once they did 2 views, it was a learning curve to understand a triangulation of the lesion on the CC and the MLO view. So he was the one who told us that muffins rise and let's sink. And he taught it to all the trainees, meaning the lesions which are in the medial half of the breast tend to project onto the superior half of the breast on the MLO view, and the lesions on the lateral half of the breast tend to project onto the lower half of the breast on the mediolateral views. And he used the mnemonic muffins rise and let's sing for the first time, and he taught it to the trainees and the mammographers. And the addition of single magnification mammogram to conventional views in 260 biopsy-proven cases was shown to improve diagnostic accuracy by almost 40%. So now we had a film screen mammography, we had special views, we had 2-screen mammography, and now was the time to standardize the reporting and the outcomes of the breast cancer screening programs. So along with high image quality, accurate interpretation and clear communication of findings and recommendations to the referring physicians was necessary to ensure the success of mammographic screening. So around the same time as the development of mammography accreditation program, the American College of Radiology began its breast imaging reporting and data systems we call the BI-RADS initiative in response to requests from referring clinicians to standardize reporting as well as management recommendations. So the first ever version of BI-RADS came out in the year 1993, and now it's undergone about 5 revisions. And the latest we have is in the 2013. So what did BI-RADS constitute? It was the first structured reporting language for imaging and contains 3 important components: a lexicon for descriptors, a reporting structure to final assessment categories and management recommendations, and a framework for data collection and auditing. Now, as I said, BI-RADS has now undergone 5 revisions, and it, of course, includes ultrasound and MRI. So one, as we go through this journey of mammography, should also understand that it was somewhere in the 70s that ultrasound came into medical application, and people started using ultrasound as a conjunct to mammography to look at breast cancers and coming up with all the criteria to qualify a lesion as malignant or benign. So it was a wholesome, a simultaneous development in all these modalities, which has brought us to where we stand today. So this is broadly how the BI-RADS looks, and we all know that we follow this every day. So now that we had the film screen mammography and we were doing pretty good, but there were certain disadvantages with the film screen mammography. It had a very limited range and we couldn't commit mistakes. We had to use the right technique, the right stringent developing process to get the most ideal images, and which wasn't easy at all. And it had a very long learning curve for the technologists. And there was some amount of noise due to the film granularity. The acquisition times were still a bit long. They needed to be repeated, especially when there was a motion blur or when the positioning wasn't very good. So it was resulting in more radiation to the patient, and film was the sole medium for acquisition, display, and storage. Film processing costs, and there was a need to maintain all this, and it was extremely delicate and sensitive systems to work with. And there were no post-processing options, so once done, it was done, and you had to live with those films forever. And they didn't do very great in detecting breast cancers in dense breasts. So just when everybody thought that this was the best thing that was available and this was the best that could happen, came digital mammography at the turn of the century. So how did digital mammography happen, and what did it actually do? So when you see the screen film mammography, the film is this is where the recording of the image or the information happens. This is the display, and this is archiving. So the film is your major limitation. Whereas when it came to digital mammography, it decoupled every step. You could record the image separately, you could display it separately, you could archive it separately. So you could optimize each one of these steps independent of each other. So image acquisition and display are separated. It has a wide dynamic range. What does it mean? If my tech didn't have the best technique, she didn't use the most ideal KV, the latitude was much, much more forgiving, in the sense I could do a lot of post-processing to not so perfect technique and still get diagnostic quality images. So, and it required a little bit of lesser dose than screen film mammography, but the limits were the same as film screen mammography. Slightly higher KVP was required. It was doing better than film screen mammography for dense breast, and image detector was the automatic exposure control detector also, and it gave us a little bit of leeway regarding the use of molybdenum and multiple materials as the filament and the filter materials. So image latitude and contrast of structures is much better than the FSM. Noise is less, dose is less, as there's no need for an anti-scatter grid, and ability to correct under or overexposure of films without having to repeat them. And the best part is to be able to transmit these images across the globe for opinion, for presentations, or for archiving or for telereporting. So so what made it possible? The new detector technology made it all possible for us to do digital imaging. And these detectors were possible by the use of these 2 to 3 materials. So one was the scintillating phosphor, which is the cesium iodide columns on an array of amorphous silicon photodiodes, and a thin TFT flat panel technology. So GE was a pioneer in manufacturing the first digital detectors, and it used this indirect method of conversion of the X-rays into light and light into digital information. A little later on, amorphous selenium, which would convert the X-rays directly into digital information, on the flat panels was manufactured, and the resolution was much better with 70 micron pixel size. So what were the advantages of digital? Improved contrast, especially in dense breast, faster acquisition, shorter exam time, easier image storage, physician manipulation of breast images for more accurate imaging. That is, you could change the window length, the window width. You could zoom in, come out. You could just play around with the images till you got the diagnosis right. And of course, teleradiology and transmission of images. But you would be surprised to know that when the digital imaging came in and digital technology came in, the FDA didn't accept it, which we would actually imagine that it would obviously it would do better than film screen, and you would think that everybody would just take it as it came. But they had to do a digital mammography imaging screening trial to prove that digital mammography performed at least as good as film screen mammography. So what they did was, in about 50,000 women, they did both film screen mammography and digital mammography to see how they both compared. And the results were that surprisingly, there was no statistically significant difference between analog and digital modalities with respect to diagnostic accuracy. But in a subset of women, that is women under 50 years of age, perimenopausal women, and women with extremely dense breasts, digital mammography did better than film screen mammography. So dense breast meaning composition C and composition D kind of breast. Digital mammography scored better over the film screen mammography, and the first ever approval for digital mammography came in at the turn of century, and then many other companies followed suit, and there was a whole variety of digital machines that were available. So luckily, the place I work, we were one of the first, ours was the first center in South India to have acquired the digital mammogram way back in 2007. And these are just the images of the machine and the compression and the mag view domes to show you. So now let's look at some film screen mammography and some images of the full field digital mammography, which has actually been my journey through breast imaging. So this is just a normal mammogram to show you that, women with dense breasts, the images look far better on full field digital mammography than on film screen mammography. You can see the trabeculae much better. You can see the Cooper's ligaments. You can see the kin subcute. You can see the nipple areolar profile much better than in the film screen mammography. Now, this is another comparison. This woman has extremely dense breasts, and you can actually see a tiny little lump there, seen better on digital than on the film screen mammography. So the initial set of images that I'll show you are well done film screen mammograms, and you realize that we actually did very well with a well done film screen mammography, and thousands of women, lakhs of women underwent film screen mammography through the 80s and 90s, and cancers as small as 4 to 5 mm were picked up on film screen mammography. I say this because I do not want the young radiologists to think that if you do not have a digital mammography system, you cannot pick up these cancers. No, it's not like that. If you do a good film screen mammogram, you stick to the stringent ways of processing the film and positioning the patient, you can still pick up cancers and microcalcifications as small as 3 to 4 mm. So these are just some examples of film screen mammograms. These are the images that I started learning mammography with. So you see a tiny little spiculated mass there in the outer and central aspect of the left breast, which is an invasive ductal carcinoma. So another woman with a spiculated mass in the upper outer quadrant, again, an invasive ductal carcinoma. So you see another little lesion, one of the danger zones of the breast. You see a tiny little lesion tugged right under the right nipple, and that's the cancer there. So that was an IDC, a 2 centimeter IDC. And this was one of the women who was imaged on a bus for a screening. And that was a tiny little lesion there, not very well seen on the MLO view, but we got her back to do a paddle view, a spot compression view, and you can see that the tumor actually sticks out, and that was partly cystic and partly solid, and it was a mixed IDC and a lobular carcinoma. So this is another little lesion sitting there, but if you see carefully, you find one more in the lower quadrant of the right breast, maybe somewhere far posterior in the CC view, and it was 2 cancers in the same breast. So it was a multicentric malignancy. This is another example of another spiculated mass with the MAG view there, and that's the ultrasound, and that was an invasive ductal carcinoma. Another example of an area of distortion in the upper outer quadrant, not sure if it's really there. So you do a spot compression and you know it's actually sticking out, and maybe a tiny little mass there, tiny little central mass over there, and that was a low-grade DCIS. And this was another film screen mammogram. It shows you 2 lesions, one on the right and one on the left. And I bet the right has a very nice, well-defined margin and probably a nice halo around it, whereas the left breast lesion is spiculated and is kind of tenting the tent sign that we talk about of the posterior glandular margin, and that was a malignancy, and the right breast was a benign lesion. So this was a lady who transited between film screen and digital. So when we picked up a cancer in her, we picked it up on film screen, and by the time she came for the wire, we had our digital system up. So she's a 64-year-old unmarried single lady who came in for screening, and we thought there was something happening there because that's a tiny little area of distortion bar spiculated lesion. I don't see anything on the contralateral medial aspect of the left breast, and not sure whether it is this on the MLO view. Honestly, even today, I cannot tell you where it was on the MLO view. So we brought her back and did a MAG view on the film screen system. So that was the ultrasound, which kind of showed a tiny little 4 mm mass, which had dense posterior shadowing. And we did a core biopsy, and it was kind of a B4 kind of a lesion on biopsy, because my pathologist was also going through her learning curve of seeing early breast cancers and seeing and growing from looking at obviously invasive cancers to those low-grade DCIS to the ADH. So even they were going through their journey and learning curve. So it was given as a B4, but we went ahead, stuck in a wire, not the most perfect wire. This was the first wire that I did way back in 2007, and we got that lesion out, and it was a low-grade DCIS. So this was another lady. These now here onwards are all digital images, and she was a follow-up for, she had a mastectomy for the left breast for a breast cancer. And now she came for her routine annual screening, and we picked up this little area of distortion. You see it there, and probably it's somewhere there in the CC view. So, we did a biopsy, which was again kind of indeterminate in their report. But ultimately, after the wire, it turned out to be a tiny little 3 mm invasive ductal carcinoma. So this was an interesting lady, just to show that yes, digital does work very well for young women young women with dense breasts, or women with otherwise very dense breasts. So this was a 35-year-old lady who could very clearly feel a mass in the left breast. She went to about 2-3 places before coming to us, and we found that she clinically had a palpable mass. And then when we did the mammogram, if you see closely, it was a very busy breast, extremely dense. She was only 35, had a 6-year-old child. And if you go systematically, and if you do the masking technique that is taught by Tabar, you realize that there's a large blob of asymmetric, dense tissue there in the median and the rectangular no man's land of the left breast. So on ultrasound, lo behold, you have a 5-centimeter cancer with tiny little microcalcifications inside. We went ahead and did a biopsy, and it was an invasive ductal carcinoma, and almost 12 years hence, and she's doing fine. So this is another lady who came in for a nipple discharge. And what you see is this tiny little cluster in a ductal distribution of a pleomorphic microcalcification. So you see the calcium going all the way there, and you can actually kind of doodle a duct around this microcal. And so we did a stereotactic core biopsy, which showed DCIS, and we went in and did a 2D wire, and then we got that area out. So the development of digital breast imaging does not constitute an end point, but rather represents the beginning of a new era for mammography, an era in which the digital platform serves as the basis for development of innovative radiographic methods of imaging the breast, innovations that were not possible on the analog platform. So what are these innovations, and what is it that digital platform has made possible? So 1 is the digital tomosynthesis, 2 is the dual energy mammography and contrast enhanced digital mammography, which has kind of revolutionized the way we are looking at breast cancer today. So what was the problem with digital imaging? Digital mammography, it seemed actually perfect when it came in, but still cancers were getting missed. And when we look back and look at the studies, we realized that most cancers which got missed were the cancers which presented as asymmetries and distortions, where overlapping and superimposition caused a lot of problem. Because when we compress almost a 6-centimeter thick tissue to a 3-centimeter tissue, there's a lot of overlap that is happening, and we tend to either overcall or brush it away as superimposition. So we still have false negative findings, and we miss cancers, and false positive findings, which result in unnecessary recalls and more load on the system. So what was the answer for this? And the answer was tomosynthesis. So digital tomosynthesis, what does it do? The compressed breast tissue is imaged in a cozy three-dimensional manner. It is, though people like to call it a 3D mammogram, it is in the true sense not a 3D, because all the three dimensions are not strictly isometric. So we still like to call it a digital tomosynthesis. It is performed by a series of low-dose radiographic exposures and using the resultant projection image data set to reconstruct the cross-sectional in-plane images in standard mammographic views. It reduces the summation of overlapping breast tissue, which can mimic breast cancer, and provides improved detail of non-calcified mammographic findings seen in breast cancer. It assists in lesion localization and determining mammographic extent of disease in women with known or suspected breast cancer. It helps us in improved characterization of findings, including normal structures and breast cancer. So basically what we are doing is we are slicing through the breast and looking at each section, just as a pathologist would do a large section histology. So we are actually looking at each slice of breast tissue and eliminating all the superimposed parenchyma around the lesion of interest. So these are some of the digital tomosynthesis machines that are available. So this is what we do. And you would be surprised to know that the concept of tomosynthesis or tomography was way back in 1970s, where they actually thought of this, but they didn't have very rapid systems to do it. And it is now with the digital platform that tomosynthesis has become a reality. So basically, the tube goes around the compressed breast in a certain angle, and then you can see the lesion of interest much better, and the adjacent area is blurred. So that's the physics behind digital tomosynthesis. So what do? The radiologists scroll through the images individually and manipulate the section thickness to as thin as 1 mm intervals. And images can also be grouped as a slab to get the 2D kind of image to evaluate the anatomic and pathologic findings. Combination mode imaging, where 2D full field digital mammography and DBT are performed in the same examination during the same breast compression. DBT projections are required first, followed by standard mammographic images obtained in a neutral perpendicular position with no change in breast compression. But of course, now you have the synthesized view, where if you're comfortable and your learning curve is you've gotten there, then you can reconstruct the 2D images with the 3D data sets that are available and actually do away with a 2D mammographic exposure. So what are the advantages for the radiologist? It is effective in localization of single view abnormalities, reduction in breast cancer screening recalls, improved sensitivity and specificity, and can acquire images in standard mammographic orientation, MLO, ML, and the CC views. It can be performed with spot compression views. You can do a tomo-guided biopsy. You can do a stereotactic core biopsy. And you can do anything that you were doing with a 2D with the today's 3D machines. So let's look at a few examples. This is a 2D MLO view. You can kind of maybe something happening there. And this is the 2D MLO slab view. And this is the cine loop. So you can actually see a speculated mass there, seen very, very beautifully on the tomography images. A second example, this a lot of calcification there, most of which is cutaneous, but you see a tiny little cluster there. And if you see the mammography here and the 3D slices, you can actually see the intramammary microcals and the cutaneous calcifications so beautifully. This is another patient with a kind of a smudgy tumor there on the 2D views, and this is the tomo slab. And when you run through the slices of tomo, you can actually see a very well-defined speculated mass in the upper aspect of the right breast. This is another image, thanks to Dr. Shilpa, a dear friend of mine. I borrowed it from her. The 2D practically doesn't show you anything. And lo behold, when you see the 3D images, you see a tiny little speculated mass and actually some amount of pleomorphic microcalcification there. And it was an invasive ductal carcinoma. And the other amazing development and development of technology was the contrast enhanced mammography, which you could call as the poor man's MRI. And the basic physiology behind contrast enhanced mammography is that tumor formation is associated with an increased formation of blood vessels, which is neoangiogenesis. And contrast-enhanced mammography has the potential to detect early-stage breast cancers by detecting signs of neoangiogenesis and to monitor effect of anti-angiogenesis drug therapies. So you could use the dual energy technique or the temporal subtraction technique. And these are just examples to show you the dual energy subtraction technique in contrast mammography. And you could actually do a temporal subtraction where you take a pre-contrast image, which acts as a mask, then you do the post-contrast and subtract and see the tumor much, much more clearly. So what's happening beyond this? Now people are trying to combine the full field digital mammography or the TOMO systems with ultrasound. So they're trying to fuse both these, and the prototypes are still being evaluated. And it can this is not the regular ultrasound that we do, but this is the high resolution whole breast ultrasound could be combined with the mammography under the same compression. So this is kind of a summary of the timeline of breast imaging. Here, probably I would add zero radiography more than thermography, because thermography honestly never took off. And even today, though people ask so many questions about thermomammography, it's really not yet there because of very, very poor spatial resolution and too many high false positives. So 2020, we have the TOMO, we have the ultrasound, we have the elasto, we have MRI, we have MR spectroscopy. We probably are going to get the positron emission mammography and so on and so forth, and many, many, many more good things to come in future. So I end my talk by saying that the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and I have miles to go before I sleep, and I have miles to go before I sleep. And just as we are remembering all these stalwarts who dedicated their lives, never gave up, and gave us the modern day mammogram and saved thousands of women of dying from breast cancer, if we can also contribute and be a small drop in this ocean of knowledge and ocean of breast imaging, I would think that it's a life well lived. Thank you very much. So that's Tabar as he looks today, and that's Dr. Bruce Porter, a pioneer in breast, in MR breast, and they are the team whose passion is to teach breast imaging across the globe. Thank you. So I'll take some questions now. Mammographic features of fibrocystic changes. So somebody is asking me, what are the mammographic features of fibrocystic changes? See, fibrocystic changes is more a diagnosis of pathology, and the imaging is more of looking at a dense breast, probably because of the cysts, the dilated ducts, and the lot of fibrosis that happens in that region. It may, if it's asymmetric, then it might just look like an asymmetric density, which when you take the woman back for an ultrasound, you realize there are tiny cysts there, very hyperechoic parenchyma there, and you see prominent ducts. So nothing classical of fibrocystic change on mammography. It's actually a diagnosis that you do after you have done the ultrasound of the woman. So someone here is asking me, rather than CC oblique, is there any other special view there to rule out breast cancers? Yes, of course, there are umpteen number of views, especially when you have cancers in the far medial or far lateral aspect of the breast, or the inframammary fold. I have found that cancers in these three regions are extremely difficult to catch on the mammography film. So it's extremely important that, number one, if the woman has a palpable lesion, you need to get that history. And number two, especially if she has had a palpable lesion and you're not seeing anything on mammogram, you got to get up, go palpate it, and tell your tech to get the right view so that she can get the tumor into the image. So some of these are the extended CC views, extended lateral views. You have the cleavage view, especially I use it pretty often for extremely medially placed breast cancers. You know, those cancers which just take off at the parasternal region. These get slipped on the regular CC views and also on the MLO views. So you could actually use a cleavage view where you're bringing the medial halves of both the breasts onto the detector, and then you do the regular compression, and you can get the tumor into the film. And having said this, and the other views that you can use, which are not special views, but when you're not sure whether something is a superimposition and you have only a 2D to work with, then you can do what is called a rolled over view, where you can actually slide the superior and the inferior halves of the breast away from each other and then image it. See, the point is, all these views are not ideal CC and MLO views, but these are addendums, these are additional views. So you get the correct information. And of course, you know the Eklund's view that you use to displace the implants. So these are the special views, the extended CC, the extended MLO views, the cleavage view, and the rolled over views. So CC and MLO, do we need to set the same compression or not? Must to keep the same from CC to MLO view. See, compression has to be optimal, neither too much nor too less, because if it's too less, the breast is going to move and your exposure is not going to be that good. And if the compression is too much, because of the pain, the woman may move. So the compression has to be just optimal, and it need not be the same in CC or MLO view, as much as the woman can tolerate. Please ask her to ask questions in the, okay. Which is the danger area of the breast. So the danger areas of the breast are the no man's land, which I think I'll just go back to one of the films. Yeah, so the danger areas of the breast are, yeah, so let's just take this MLO, are the subareolar region, the superior cone of the breast, the retroglandular region, which is called the no man's land, and in the CC view, the medial half of the breast. So these are the regions where we tend to miss cancers. So these are called the danger zones of the danger areas of the breast. What is the future of digital mammography in the India market? It's a very good question. Actually, I thought I would be exceeding the time, so I didn't include the Indian scenario. So if I can just go back to one of my other presentations, I can show you that the breast cancer trends in India are that, we are actually having about 40 to 50% of cancers between the age of 40 and 60. Unlike abroad, where the cancers are much later, we see almost a 1 decade younger. We see cancers in women who are 1 decade younger. So the problem is that these women are going to have dense breasts, and they're going to have more cancers than women in other parts of the world. So I believe that if there is one country where we need digital systems which can give us good images in dense breasts, it is India. So I appeal to all of you who are practicing breast imaging, who are working in diagnostic centers, to request your people to get and install digital systems, because now with the advent of tomography and contrast mammograms, the digital systems are far less, they cost you far less. So I think that all the CR systems should be replaced with the DR. A film screen is still good, but the CRs have a lot of artifacts and a lot of problems, and not the most ideal systems to work on. And digital would be the most ideal system to work on in India. Size change, right versus blessed. How can we identify if the compression value was set different from right and left? See, compression is different from positioning. See, compression doesn't mean that you're getting less breast. You're only saying that you're compressing the breast less, but you are getting the entire tissue into the view. Once you have got it, that's when the compression changes. So compression, unless the compression is too less and the woman has moved back and some part of the breast has slipped, it's only then that you will have a difference in the thickness or the depth of the image of the breast that you have included. So you got to go back and repeat it. There are no shortcuts to that. And one must also know that the thickness of the breast, that is the anterior posterior thickness of the breast, remains the same in CC and MLO view, and you can at the most have a 1 centimeter difference between the thickness of the breast in MLO versus CC. Meaning, if your MLO, the breast in MLO measures 10 centimeters in thickness, it should not be less than 9 centimeters in your CC view. If it is 6 or 7 or 8, you got to go back and reposition the patient and get your CC views done again. CESM, when do we need to recommend? Yes, maybe subtle distortions where you've looked on ultrasound and you couldn't find anything, but but it's very convincing on mammogram and you couldn't find a correlative ultrasound lesion, then you can probably go ahead and do a contrast mammogram to see if the tumor is really there. And number two, in multifocal disease and tumors with a lot of microcalcifications in the surrounding parenchyma, CESM tends to show you much, much more than what your conventional mammogram shows you. Yeah. Can we diagnose fibrocystic disease on ultrasound? See, fibrocystic disease is nothing but, I don't think we should be so worried about fibrocystic disease. Fibrocystic disease is ANDI, basically aberration in the normal development and involution of the breast, which ANDI is the term that is used in our textbooks. So fibrocystic disease is a clinical diagnosis more than the imaging diagnosis. But if the woman is having pain in a certain region of the breast, and if you tend to see tiny microcysts and few dilated ducts and a little bit of altered hyperechoic glandular parenchyma, you can call it an area of focal fibrocystic change and not disease, because it's not a disease. It is a physiologic change that is happening in the woman's breast every month. So it is a bit exaggerated in some women and it is not there in some. So that is about it. And of course, formation of cysts and dilatation of the ducts and hyperechoic parenchyma, all these are actually benign breast changes. More than fibrocystic, I would actually call them benign breast changes. So if the examination has 2D tomo, 2D synthesized, and CESM, what would be the recommended order, the order in which you would do? See, what would I do? I would first look at the 2D, then run my tomo slices. See, 2D synthesized, not all machines are capable of giving it to you, but if you have them, you can look at them, you can look at the true 2D, you can look at the true 2D synthesized, and finally you can look at the contrast enhanced mammogram. So you would actually start with your 2D, go to your tomo slices, look at your synthesized view if you see anything different, and then go to the contrast enhanced. CESM is something like an MR mammography. When would you want to do an MR mammogram? When would you want to look at an MR mammography? So that's where the CESM stands as on today. Image registration is useful. I don't get this question. I don't know what it is. Can I look at the questions on the chat box? I can't see the chat box here. Yeah, can someone help me with the chat box? I don't understand what is image registration. If you can type in the question again. Plains versus slab Tomo, what would be reading workflow if both are available? Plains, of course. You look at, when you have the advantage of looking at it slice by slice, why would you want to look at a thick section? Look at the 2D, then look at the slices. If you have a synthesized view, look at the slices and look at the synthesized view. Screening. Somebody is asking me a question. In this age of 3D tomosynthesis, mammography, still screen film mammography should be said as gold standard. No, we don't say 2D screen film mammography is gold standard. We just say mammography is the gold standard for breast cancer screening. So you move on with technology, and if you have the digital, then digital mammography is the gold standard. But the bottom line is mammography is the gold standard for breast cancer screening. And in the state of COVID, do you think mammography should be used as a screening tool for breast carcinoma? If you have a woman with a palpable tumor, there are, you can go through the SBI and the ACR recommendations for breast cancer imaging in COVID. So the screenings are deferred for the time being. And if a woman has come with a palpable lump, which is highly suspicious breast cancer, then of course you need to attend to her, because cancer may not be emergency, but it is definitely urgent. So if there are some biopsies that I'm doing during the lockdown, it is these highly suspicious cancers that I'm actually biopsying. So can we do screening mammography in current pandemic? I think I've answered that. No screening, please, only symptomatic. Radiation dose of tomosynthesis compared to digital mammography, it is almost the same, very marginally different. 2D tomosynthesis doesn't really increase the dose as much. Thanks. Sensitivity of 2D mammogram versus 3D, of course. In fact, some studies say 3D is able to pick up almost 30 to 40% more cancers than 2D. So definitely sensitivity, especially when you're looking at distortions and asymmetries, definitely tomosynthesis scores over regular digital mammography. Tomorrow, in case of encapsulated breast implant, can it be applied in that case? Yes, you can use tomography in breast implants. Are in front. Hello, ma'am. I work in a cancer hospital in Nepal, as all the health workers are in frontliner, but mammographer comes so close to patient. No screening during COVID. Please go through the SBI and ACR guidelines for screening mammograms. Screening mammograms are to be deferred. Role of stereo biopsy on tomosynthesis, of course, it's as much as it is on 2D. See, stereo is for suspicious microcalcification, no matter whether you've picked them up on 2D or 3D. So if you have seen an isolated microcalcification which does not have an ultrasound correlate and is seen purely on stereo or purely on 3D or 2D mammogram, then stereo is the answer. Mammographic features of lobular carcinoma, I think it's beyond the purview of this discussion. I'm not going to talk about how to diagnose breast cancer. Anyway, lobular are notorious to be bilateral, multifocal, multicentric, and it's a different topic altogether. To detect ductal malignancy at areolar region, yes, it is a tricky area. So mammogram, you have to be very sure that you do not superimpose the nipple on the breast, because you tend to miss subareolar cancers if the nipple is not in profile and is overlapping the breast tissue. So that's number one. And when you do an ultrasound, you got to lift off the nipple and then look at the retroareolar region. You should actually displace the nipple, put a blob of jelly under the nipple, lift it off, and then look right under the nipple to pick up these subareolar cancers. How contrast mammography is done, I'm not going to discuss that now. See, a standard amount of compression. See, each machine has its own numbers. So it says 7 dyne, 8 dyne, 9 dyne. So depends on how much the patient can tolerate. Anywhere above 7. In fact, if you give less, the machine is not going to accept it. It's not going to do the exposure. So too less, the machine itself is not going to expose the breast. So about 7 dyne, 8 dyne, depends, changes from machine to machine. Um, any technique or tips to be given for positioning very small and dense breast, as it is always an issue? I completely agree, especially if you're a busy center and you get some male patients for mammography. That's when it's a little difficult. But then if you can get the patient to move very close to the detector and get the breast tissue to fall off the pectoral, you do manage to get some good images. We regularly do mammograms in not just small-breasted women, but also in male breast. So it shouldn't be that difficult. Morphology of microcalcification, yes, DBT versus 2D. DBT and microcal is one area where DBT is not going to contribute much to your 2D knowledge. So if you had a 2D and you picked up microcal, I mean, Tomo is not going to add much unless there is an underlying mass there and probably a little bit of the extent. But when it comes to morphology, what you see on 2D is what the Tomo shows you. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think it's already, we have passed the time and so not much of radiation issues with DBT. It's all been standardized. FDA has approved it. It's just marginally a little more than digital 2D mammography. So not to worry. Tomos are safe. No worries. So I think I've answered more of, so what are the indications of cleavage view? I mentioned already, especially when you have lesions which are extremely close to the parasternal regions of the breast, extremely medially placed cancers which tend to get slipped on MLO and the CC views, you could do a cleavage view. Yeah, so I think I've kind of answered most of the questions. And then what is the correct cortical thickness of lymph node to be abnormal? So lymph nodes are to be evaluated by ultrasound. So mammography is not the modality to evaluate lymph nodes. Yes, if you've seen a rounded lymph node, you've seen a loss of fatty hilum, and you've seen obviously malignant looking lymph nodes on mammogram, you of course mentioned them. But then when you're looking at these subtle tiny lymph nodes in the axilla on ultrasound, ultrasound is the best modality to call a lymph node as involved or not. And 2 mm is the cortical thickness that is taken as the cutoff. So anything more than 2 mm is abnormal. But again, having said that, it is not just the thickness, but the entire morphology of the node signature that you have to look at. You have to see whether this thickening is eccentric. Is it eating up into the fatty hilum? And if it's a uniform thickened cortex with a very well preserved fatty hilum, you know it is reactive. But when you have this undulating cortical thickening where it is 5 mm, 2 mm in one area, you know it is not good, especially in the presence of a cancer in the breast. So 2 mm is the cutoff, but again, you need to be very careful in looking at the node architecture and the node signature. Yeah, so thank you very much for the opportunity given to me. So I hope the talk was useful, and all of you, please stay safe and keep social distancing and use judicious use of imaging and ultrasound, especially to all those who practice ultrasound. Please take care. Please wear the PPEs correctly, and please help your staff protect themselves. And let us all join hands in fighting this terrible, terrible enemy called the coronavirus and the COVID-19 disease. Thank you very much.